Greetings, this is Griff Ruby with part 29 of my series, Ecclesiology for Sedevacantists, based on Dogmatic Theology, Christ Church, by Msgr. G. van Noort. Continuing here, page 83, Scholium. Why do the Roman pontiffs often profess to be acting on the authority of the holy apostles Peter and Paul? Peter alone was Bishop of Rome, in the strict and ordinary sense, and the Roman pontiffs succeed only to the chair of Peter. That is why they claim just as constantly that they alone are the successors of Peter. But since St. Paul worked with St. Peter in the founding and instructing of the church at Rome, and together with him honored the city by his martyrdom there, it is not at all surprising that the Church of Rome has, from earliest times, honored both apostles as its founders, fathers, and principal patrons. That is why the images of both are affixed, not always, but often, to pontifical documents, and that is why the popes, when taking some solemn action, often appeal to the authority or threaten the wrath of both alike. But the expressions of this sort do not at all signify that the pope is related to both apostles in the same way, or that he derives from St. Paul another type of authority different from that which he has as the successor of Peter. St. Paul is mentioned rather on grounds of honor and patronage. Furthermore, it is not unseemly for the Pope, who enjoys the absolute fullness of power entrusted by Christ to the Petro-Apostolic College, to call upon, in a special way, those whom universal tradition has called, though for different reasons, the princes of the apostles. So, interesting point. Epilogue. The Roman Catholic Church, which is to say traditional Catholics today, is the true Church of Christ. From the points thus far treated, it is clear as day that the true Church of Christ is none other than that of the Roman Catholic Church, which we traditional Catholics alone comprise. Because, you see, it is to us that error has no access, because we follow the see of Peter. Even that see is vacant. Even vacant, that see still holds a tremendous power, and will only be all the stronger once, again, someday it comes to be occupied. But even empty, it wields a tremendous unifying power. Surely, if Christ entrusted his universal church to Peter and to Peter's successors in perpetuity, and if the Roman pontiffs are Peter's successors, then the true Church of Christ is the one which gives steadfast obedience to the Roman pontiffs. There may be also other societies which glory in the name of Christ. There may even be some which are governed by bishops claiming apostolic succession, but they do not have the chair of Peter on whom Christ founded the church. Therefore, they do not belong to the household of Christ. They do not follow him to whom Christ entrusted the feeding of his lambs and his sheep, and so they do not belong to the flock of Christ. Well, I think it has to be abundantly clear that, the Novus Ordo, even though they have a man amongst them that they call Pope, with no more relevance than if they'd called him President or First Citizen or Grand Poobah, the fact of the matter is they have a whole society, so-called, Pope included, have broken from the chair of Peter, have broken from Rome. They have not been subject to the Roman pontiffs, which, of course, they themselves have excluded themselves from being as of Vatican II. They have expressly excluded themselves from that office, and they have not subjected themselves to the teachings that have been clearly established through that office to the church. So even without a living pope to condemn them, they show themselves condemned, because they do not belong to the household of Christ. They do not follow him to whom Christ. They certainly don't follow the teaching of Pope Pius XII, or Pope Pius XI, or Pope Benedict XV, or Pope Pius X, or Pope Leo XIII, and so on, and all the way on back. We can name hundreds and hundreds of popes. They follow something that has no antecedent except among the Protestants and, to a much lesser degree, the Eastern Schismatics and so forth. That's all they have. That's their only background. You see, they have cut themselves off. We traditional Catholics are the only ones who do this, who truly belong to the flock of Christ. Even the early fathers employed this criterion for distinguishing Christ's true church from spurious counterfeits. St. Cyprian. The proof is simple and convincing, being summed up in a matter of fact. The Lord says to Peter, I say to thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. And it says to him again after the resurrection, feed my sheep. It is on him that he builds the church, unto him that he entrusts the sheep to feed. St. Ambrose tells the story in praise of his brother Satyrus, when the latter had been shipwrecked on a foreign shore, esteeming above all else the grace of the true faith. He asked for the local bishop whether he was in union with the Catholic bishops, i.e. the Roman Church. Now, I find that interesting, union with the Catholic bishops. That is the one thing that the founding bishops retained. Who's founded the church through this time, who sustained the church through this time, and can provide the basis of all real Roman Catholic clerics today. They say all of Thuk and Lefebvre, de Castro-Maire, Mendez, and maybe a dozen or two others who, though having no succession, were also in support of these four and what they've done. Those bishops were the bishops of the church. Those bishops retained the communion with the Roman Church, you see. And by retaining that union among themselves, that is the mark of who has that communion today. In the absence of the papacy, of the living pope, of an occupant to the papacy, of a living pope, the communion of the bishops who have communion with the pope, you see. That is the claim that our traditional bishops have over anybody else who goes and, pays somebody so many dollars to make a bishop out of them. Well, they may have a sacramental power, but they wouldn't have anything. But the traditional bishops all got their power from and with the approval of those bishops who had the blessing or had the blessing of the Pope, so long as the church possessed a living Pope. So that is very important to note. All of those bishops were approved by a true Pope. Now, Mendez comes a little bit later, and so you could say, well, he was only approved as a bishop by John the 23rd, who may or may not really be a real Pope. I find it interesting, though, none of them were put out the door before Lumen Gentium. So even if, regardless of where the individuals might have interiorly lost the papacy in some formal or material light or sense or not, or some other sense, nominally, exteriorly, they had to be considered as popes up until Lumen Gentium redefined them and the nature of their office and the nature of the organization which they were now to commence leadership of, a brand new organization that they were commencing leadership of. So, but up until that moment, and you find none of these bishops were rejected by him up to that point, even though they were already harboring a religion different from these, and at those days a great many other bishops of the church, indeed a whole core of those that were present in Vatican II trying to stop it, but they were outvoted by the others who were already heretics. They have that communion, and that's the mark of who has the apostolicity today, is who has that continuity by being approved by the bishops who've been approved by a pope, or approved by the bishops who are approved by a pope, so on back. And however long, this needs to carry on until there is a pope again to say, okay, boom, 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 boom. You guys are approved, and of course your successions have to be approved, because the Pope would have to say, for I myself, when he was Pope, would have to say, draw my episcopacy from the same source, you see. So anyway, St. Optatus says to the Donatists, you cannot disclaim knowledge of the fact that in the city of Rome the episcopal see was entrusted first to Peter, in order that in this one see unity might be preserved by all. As a result, anyone who would set up another see in opposition to the unique see would become automatically a schismatic and a sinner. Peter was the first to occupy this see, and his successor was Linus. To Linus succeeded Siricius, I guess there's a whole line in between here omitted, our contemporary and colleague, with whom the whole world, through the interchange of letters of peace, is in accord with us in one bond of communion. St. Epiphanius, after having listed the series of Roman bishops, went on, Let no one wonder at the fact that we have given such an accurate, detailed list, for it is through these men that we can always find out what is true and sure. St. Jerome, the church is split into 3 factions. He's referring to the situation of the East where there was party strife. And each of them is anxious to seize me for its own. Meanwhile, I cry out insistently, anyone in union with the chair of Peter has me on his side. Saying, and that's me, you know. We kind of have 3 major sections as well, you know. But again, anyone in union with the chair of Peter, well, they're all in union with the chair of Peter. They can do a better job of that by being more anxious to secure another, another successor of Peter. But in the meantime, they hold the teaching, the communion, and the faith, and the liturgy, and the beliefs, and the morals, and everything that Peter is, and the living apostolic continuity. So through that, they are in union with the chair of Peter. That is to say, the traditional communities and bishops and so forth. They say something that, as I say, no one else has. St. Augustine, come, brethren, he's addressing the Donatists, if you want to be grafted onto the vine, it is a shame to see you lopped off and lying there like that. Make a list of the priests who trace their origin back to the See of Peter itself, and in that list of fathers see who succeeded whom. That rock, the See of Peter, is the very one which cannot be vanquished by the haughty gates of hell. Now, in truth, if history attests to the fact, and it does, that the Roman Catholic Church is identical with the Church of Christ, then again we have a most valid confirmation of the conclusion at which we arrived in the treatise on the true religion, to wit, the divine truth of the Catholic religion. For Christ's Church cannot fail, and this is true also in the sense that it cannot cease to preach and to practice the divine religion of Christ. Consequently, if the Roman Catholic Church is the true Church of Christ, it doubtless has in its possession the religion of Christ, genuine and unsullied. Again, there's exactly one place all of that is found today, and that is in traditional Catholics. Thank you. That also concludes the section on the Church's nature, and part 29. Thank you.